She hated her daughter so much that she let her new boyfriend torture and unalive her. The tragic case of 5-year-old Mercedes Losoya, trigger warning. On February 7, 2022, 23-year-old Katrina Mendoza rushed her 5-year-old daughter Mercedes to the hospital because she was unresponsive and not breathing. Doctors did all they could to resuscitate her, but sadly, she was pronounced dead. The doctors called the police, and when they arrived on the scene, they were shocked because Mercedes didn't look like a little girl anymore. She looked like something out of a horror movie. An autopsy was performed, and they determined that Mercedes had suffered extreme abuse and that she was tortured to death. She had so many injuries to her body that the medical examiner couldn't even figure out the cause of death. They had to do a more extensive examination to try to figure out what she actually died from. Mercedes had extensive bruising, scratches, cuts, and swelling on every visible portion of her body. Her hair had been snatched out so hard that parts of her scalp were missing. They even found defense wounds on both sides of her hands and feet where she had fought back. Her tiny little feet were so beaten and battered, she was missing most of her toenails on each foot. Mercedes had pattern-like injuries all over her body where someone had severely beaten her with a belt. And like we've seen in so many other cases, when the police brought Katrina and her boyfriend Jose in for questioning, they immediately turned on each other. Katrina said she and her daughters had just moved in with Jose, so she asked him to help her discipline her daughter Mercedes, but what he did was not discipline. He started torturing her. Katrina said she watched Jose shovel dog poop into Mercedes' mouth and smeared all over her face while screaming at her. She said Jose soaked a sock in urine, shoved it in Mercedes' mouth, and when he snatched the sock back out, he snatched out 2 of her front teeth with it. He forced her to hold heavy objects while standing in the same spot for hours as he beat her with the belt. She said she watched him punch Mercedes in the face repeatedly while wearing these big metal rings. Girl, I would have bashed him upside his head with a frying pan. Katrina told the police Jose had filmed a lot of this abuse, so he had it on video. It'd be on his phone. Of course, when the police questioned Jose, he put all the blame on Katrina. He claimed he'd only smacked Mercedes one time on the butt and put her in the corner one time, and every other injury that she had came from Katrina. Then Jose claimed it was Katrina's other daughter, who was only 6 years old, that had done this to Mercedes. Police wrote, Jose appears to be deflecting responsibility for his actions onto Katrina and the other child in the home, but Mercedes' 6-year-old sister corroborated her mom's story. The police interviewed Katrina's other daughter, and she said that while they both had hit her, Jose had been beating her for the past few days more viciously. Now, even though Katrina's daughter did corroborate her story, that doesn't mean that Katrina is innocent because police found out Katrina did nothing to help Mercedes. She didn't even call 911, and she even drug around waiting before she took her to the hospital the day she died. Katrina had been abusing Mercedes since she was born, long before she met Jose. So on February 10th, 2022, Katrina and Jose were both arrested and booked into the Bexar County Jail on charges of felony injury to a child resulting in great bodily harm. Why were they not immediately charged with murder? Because that's what it was. Now, Katrina was facing a life sentence, but the DA offered her a plea deal and she took it. Now get this shit. During Katrina's sentencing, her crappy defense attorney, Todd McCray, asked the judge to sentence Katrina to probation, saying that Katrina needs psychological help and prison time will not help her do that. Her lawyer said, Katrina feels like God has abandoned her. She's heartbroken. She's depressed. Well, book and who? What about Mercedes? Todd also added that Katrina would be testifying against Jose, and that was one help that she could take a step forward to being a better person. But the state said that Katrina knew about the abuse, saw it happen, and did nothing to help her daughter. So goddamn it, she was going to get 45 years no matter what he said. So the prosecutors agreed to cap her sentence at 45 years in exchange for her admission of guilt. But the judge, Stephanie Boyd, announced that she would hold off on formally sentencing Katrina until after Jose's trial was completed. So during Jose's trial, Katrina told the jury about how her boyfriend abused her daughter and she did nothing to save her. She told the jurors he severely disciplined her daughter to death. She said he would pull out Mercedes' hair. He covered her mouth and nose. He used thumbtacks on her feet. He would mop the floor with her in her urine, get her on the ground and drag her through her own urine, and then put her urine-soaked clothes back in her mouth. Katrina also added that she sent a picture on Jose's phone where he had shoved dog poop in Mercedes' mouth and smeared it all over her face. The prosecutors asked her if she tried to stop Jose, and she responded several times, but he didn't listen to her. She later admitted that she allowed the abuse to happen. The jurors deliberated for a little under an hour before delivering their guilty verdict against Jose, who was charged with injury to a child causing serious bodily injury. Jose was sentenced to life in prison for his first count, 20 years in prison for his second count, and 10 years in prison for his third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, and eighth counts. The sentences will run concurrently. The paternal family and the neighbors both claimed they called the San Antonio police and CPS, but no one ever came out to investigate. Mercedes' aunt said, "It's sad to say, but we automatically knew something was wrong with Mercedes because her mother always had a lot of anger towards Mercedes. I don't know why, but she favored the other sister, and I saw that right off the bat." Mercedes' paternal family said that Katrina had other relationships before Jose, and they would all abuse Mercedes, and Katrina never stood up for her daughter. When Mercedes was a baby, Katrina told a relative that she had not given her a bottle in more than 3 days. Katrina had also once told a relative that she didn't have a bond with Mercedes and that she couldn't bond with her. And for as long as the whole family could recall, they always noticed that Mercedes had injuries at the hands of her mother. One relative said Mercedes once got a haircut with bangs to cover the bruising on her forehead. Her mom mistreated her from the day she was born. The family often seen Mercedes with bruises all over her body, so they contacted CPS when Mercedes was very young, but sadly CPS did nothing to protect her. We told them from the time she was born that Mercedes was in harm's way, but they would not listen to us. CPS never took our complaint seriously. Even with all the pictures and all the bruises that were on her body, they would never investigate or take her away from her mother. Mercedes' biological father last seen her in October of 2021, but since then, Katrina wouldn't allow him to see his daughter. Guys, if you're not allowed to see your children, don't wait for CPS. Go file for custody. A neighbor at the apartment complex, Gabriel Granado, who shared a wall with Katrina and Jose, said that he had called CPS several times. The first report was in November of 2021, just after Thanksgiving. He said, "We were hearing beating sounds that sounded like a fist hitting a hand for at least the past 2 weeks. I would say we heard more than 50 hits. So we called CPS, but no one ever showed up." His girlfriend said that she called the police herself several times, and the last time she called the police was just 2 days before Mercedes died on February 5th. Gabriella said that day she knew something was a little different. This time she said she witnessed a previous incident where Katrina was abusive towards Mercedes in the apartment parking lot. Allegedly, Katrina kicked her daughter, and this wasn't the first time she had done so in front of witnesses. The neighbor said it was so upsetting. We could hear the smacks, we could hear the punches, we could hear her screaming, we could hear them screaming at her. We called the police, we called CPS. We did everything we thought we could do for her, but nobody would help. The neighbor said the one time San Antonio police did come out, Katrina wouldn't answer the door, so the cops just left and never followed up. Now, the San Antonio Police Department claims they have never dealt with Katrina, had any phone calls to go out to her house, and they have never responded to any calls at her address. But Katrina did move around a lot. Now, CPS did admit they had investigated Katrina a couple of times before, but they did not disclose why the allegations were not further investigated, why Mercedes hadn't been removed, or why the case was closed. Now, let's take a moment to remember 5-year-old Mercedes Losoya. Mercedes was known for having a loving heart and being a sweet little girl. Her Aunt Emily said she loved God, she loved going to church, and she loved going to school. She loved everyone. When she sang at church, she kept a smile on her face and would sing at the top of her lungs. She loved God and she didn't care who knew it. A family friend said, when Mercedes hugged you, you knew she meant it. She cared about you. She would ask how you were doing because she genuinely wanted to know how you were doing and if you were okay. She loved people. She really cared about us. She was a brave little girl who wasn't afraid to be herself, and she cared about others. What gets me is these women who say, well, I seen him hitting the children, but I was too scared to get involved because what if he hit me? Bitch, you gonna have to hit me first because I'm jumping in. Ain't nobody gonna hit my kids in front of me. I'm gonna jump in and pull a Medea and put a frying pan upside their damn head.